Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michal Salini, and I'll moderate this short panel on the EU Arctic policy. So the developments in the Arctic region have always had an impact at the European and the international level as well, requiring EU-level cooperation due to their cross-border nature. The European Union laid the foundation of its Arctic policy through a communication on the Arctic region in 2008, and the most recent update of the EU Arctic policy took place in October 2021 with the adoption of a joint communication on a stronger EU engagement for a peaceful, sustainable and prosperous Arctic. However, the region has been experiencing profound changes lately, and in 2021, the joint communication, which was adopted, is now being reviewed as of 2026 by the European Commission to reflect these challenges, and its updated version is expected later this year. In this lightning talk, we will discuss the main points of this revision, the European Union's vision for the region, and the gaps and challenges which could be tackled with the help of Earth observation solutions. And to discuss these topics today, we are joined by Mr. Morten Absalonsson Østerø, a diplomat from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, seconded to the European External Action Service since 2023. Mr. Østerø covers Arctic affairs and is working closely with the EU's Special Envoy for Arctic Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yes, and thank you very much, Miguel, for having me and inviting me. And even though I think I've stressed on multiple occasions that I am here in my capacity as a generalist, so beware, there will be no technical specifications coming out of my lips. But it's indeed true, the EU has had an Arctic engagement since its joint communication was released in 2008. And for that, we have a broad sort of horizontal engagement, but I think most importantly is this phrase you always hear in terms of the Arctic, which is that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And this is something we always hear because of climate change. I mean, we can imagine if there is a dramatic decline of ice or heating of the Arctic regions, which we know is happening 4 to 5 times faster than the rest of the world, then it has a dramatic impact for the rest of the world as well.
I would just like to remind the audience that we have a poll for this lightning talk as well, where you can answer a question about where do you think Earth observation can contribute the most to the European Union's efforts in the Arctic region. And with saying that, I would like to give you the first question, Morten, which is focused on your role and the role of the European External Action Service in EU Arctic policy. And how does this role complement the efforts of other European Union bodies, for example, DG Mare, but also other bodies, services, or entities?
Yeah, thank you. And of course, now I already mentioned climate change, and only climate change already spans quite a few services in the Commission. We had a colleague up here from DG Klima just before, which is very important to the Arctic as well. We need to be able to be mindful of that the changes happening in the Arctic, these are related to basically rapidly changing climate. So we need to have Earth observation, of course. You need to have robust scientific data. So you need to have the involvement of DG Klima and RTD already. You need to have a just transition, which then demands that we need to extract both the materials available in the Arctic to secure the supply that's required. So we need to have someone from DG GROW, and we also need to have the involvement of a human dimension, because I think something that we usually do when we, or mistakenly do when we consider the Arctic, is we discuss the Arctic as if it is a uninhabited space, and we tend to forget that there are people living in the Arctic, which is an incredibly important thing to include in the Arctic engagement of the EU. So you have people who have everyday concerns, they need to have infrastructure, they need to have school, they need to have roads, health infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And the EU engagement spans across all of these. And in our work in the EAS, we are one of the co-leads on the Arctic engagement of the EU. So this means that we, if we bring it all the way down to a practical level, we have to round up multiple services from the Commission to sit down in what we call an inter-service group meeting. So everyone who has some form of engagement with the Arctic will keep each other updated on how the implementation of the EU Arctic engagement is progressing. And from there on, of course, we have more regular meetings with international partners, especially the Arctic states. So each of the Arctic states, they have a senior Arctic official. And you mentioned already that I work closely with the senior Arctic official, if we can call her that, as sort of special envoy for the Arctic or ambassador at large for the Arctic. Claude Véron-Reville will meet in that capacity with her counterparts from the Arctic states. And in conferences such as these and international conferences abroad, usually taking place in the Arctic, most of the Arctic states have their own respective Arctic conferences. There will always be meetings to keep each other updated and sharing notes on what's pressing in the Arctic region.
Yeah, thank you very much. From what you just said, it's very visible that the Arctic policy is a very horizontal topic, which requires the involvement of a lot of actors at the European level as well. And coming more to the actual EU Arctic policy, so this year, the European Commission aims to update the Arctic policy, and the process of its revision has commenced. What would you say are the key points of this update, and how is the revision progressing? And could you shed some light on the reasons or the needs that prompted this revision that is happening this year?
Absolutely. You mentioned already that the current joint communication was issued in October 2021. And as we're aware, there's been a lot of developments since October 2021. And for us, particularly when we look at the Arctic, one of the biggest land masses inside the Arctic Circle is the Russian. And that's something that has become very problematic because in February 2022, they waged an illegal war on Ukraine. And this had, unfortunately, a lot of implications for the Arctic cooperation. So as I said before, we usually say the sentence of what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, but what has since happened is that what happens outside the Arctic does not stay outside the Arctic either. And we can see this Arctic exceptionalism, which we have subscribed to for a number of years, i.e. that you can separate global developments outside of the Arctic from the cooperation needed to address climate change inside of the Arctic, is no longer tenable because it relies fully on multilateral cooperation. And once we have an actor such as Russia that disregards the international rules-based order, that cooperation is no longer functional. And we can see that it has impeded the fora in which Arctic cooperation takes place, notably the Arctic Council, which, albeit is on pause, but very impeded currently. So the decision for the EU to revise the joint communication is not that we take previous iterations, so this will be the 5th iteration since 2008, and throw those out, but rather we were building upon what we already have amassed of experience and knowledge and know-how since 2008, and adapt and tailor it to this new Arctic landscape, which unfortunately requires to have some geopolitical considerations, which will bring us into a more of a resilience formulation, and it's incredibly important to keep in mind, as I mentioned, that we will not be throwing away what has already been done. So we acknowledge still that climate change is an incredibly important and disastrous challenge faced by the Arctic, but we will have to address these new geopolitical dynamics.
Thank you very much. Yes, as you mentioned, we have seen a lot of developments in the last years, since 2021, from the security and defense point of view, a climate point of view, sustainability point of view, and definitely Arctic region is one of the regions that is facing these challenges. And of course, the EU's policy has to reflect these changes that we have seen in the last few years. So when we are talking about the revision, of course, the European Commission wants to have kind of this new approach. You mentioned that, of course, the Commission doesn't want to get rid of what has happened before, and the European Union wants to take into account the previous policies as well. But this update is supposed to react on these challenges that have happened in the last few years. But when we talk about what the revision is about, of course, there are some challenges pointed out by the European Commission itself. But still, of course, not everything is going to be solved with a single EU Arctic policy. And this is something that I would maybe ask as a next question. Where do you see or how do you perceive the main gaps and challenges connected to the European Union's efforts in the Arctic region? Or in other words, what challenges do you foresee for the EU's Arctic policy now or in the future? And perhaps how can they be addressed? And what kind of data or tools might be beneficial for you or for EAS to tackle these gaps and challenges?
Thank you, Mikael. Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if we could make an EU-Arctic joint communication which would solve and address everything that was possible. But of course, we rely on cooperation, and from the EU we can point towards, and it's important to highlight as well and underscore that the EU Arctic engagement is made in consultation with the Arctic states, Arctic stakeholders, NGOs, so they will have their fingerprints inside the Arctic joint communication. And what we can see from there is combined and paired with what I was saying earlier, the new geopolitical realities that we're facing. We're seeing a number of hybrid attacks. We're seeing foreign information manipulation and interference. And we're seeing sabotage of critical infrastructure. And this is paired with the existing challenges of climate change. So it will require that we address, in also pairing with what we're seeing from the consultations, we usually, if we're looking at something like creating job opportunities in the northernmost regions, you have an issue of remoteness, and you clearly have prioritized building road infrastructure that will connect usually the north to the south, so we can bring goods and services further south. But you tend to undervalue and underappreciate the necessity to also connect the north within itself, because the distances can be enormous across from west to east. So in order to address those challenges, it will be incredibly important to have railroads, to have roads to connect east to west as well. Also to facilitate the military mobility in the north. So dual use will be a key word, resilience will be a key word. I think also Earth observations, which can be more sophisticated than what we have now to look further under the ocean surface to detect how the ice is disappearing or how anything might be navigable in the Arctic will be incredibly important. I think those, for me, would be one of the key things to highlight, in addition to perhaps I mentioned as well that people who live in the Arctic, of course, want to have their everyday lives to be as functional as possible, and we are reliant on, in some cases, if you're living in an area which is heavily impacted by poor weather conditions and poor road infrastructure, that services can be delivered to you via internet connectivity, for example. So we also have to ensure that there's an improved redundancy, whether cable connections or even satellite connections should be delivered to the northernmost zones.
Yeah, thank you very much for these insights. I mean, you're right that many of these gaps and challenges that you have outlined can be tackled with the use of Earth observation capabilities. You mentioned the still pressing challenge of climate change, which is not going away. Of course, Earth observation can play a huge role there through sea ice monitoring, monitoring of glacier dynamics, permafrost, methane emissions, and some other aspects as well. You mentioned infrastructure as well. So that's another topic where EO capabilities can really contribute to the EO's efforts. by providing a framework to monitor infrastructure, bolster resilience, and support the security of critical infrastructure in the Arctic region. But I mean, many environmental and biodiversity uses as well. And yeah, you mentioned the aspect of remoteness, which is typical for the Arctic region. And again, this is something that Earth observation can contribute to when it comes to EU's efforts, because Earth observation can help a lot in those remote areas where maybe in situ measurements are not that easy to perform. So thank you very much for outlining these challenges, and I hope that the Earth observation community will be able to think of many, many different ways of how it can help the European Union's efforts in this regard. So now that we are slowly approaching the end of our lightning talk, I would like to ask for the questions from Slido. So let's see if we have some. Okay, it's behind us. So we have a question about whether climate change increases the international significance of the Arctic region and therefore your work, and especially when it comes to shipping routes, natural resources, military presence, and others. So in general, like the effect of climate change on the importance of Arctic.
Thank you. A very good question, and it's something that we also are confronted with a lot when we are having these conferences and talks about the Arctic, because it becomes attractive to many actors to go for the scramble of resources when they hear that CRMs or critical raw materials become more accessible, or trade routes might become more accessible, which are shorter than the alternatives we are aware of. And it definitely increases the attention given to the region, and also it puts it into a sort of a geopolitical lens of security as well, because what does it mean how can we govern and ensure that there's freedom of navigation is respected, and how can we ensure that there's search and rescue capabilities in the Arctic if there's natural disasters occurring, if there's someone that's carrying heavy fuel oil and has a spill, where is the nearest help? Sometimes what is underappreciated is how commercially viable some of these things are. The resources might be more accessible, but they might still be very expensive to access. Workforce and labor in many of the Arctic regions is expensive. To demand more resources to extract them is also expensive. To become operational might take a long time. To navigate the Arctic, you are supposed to abide by the polar code, so you have stricter rules for navigation. You might have to have icebreakers accompanying you. You need to have insurance, and insurance might not be willing to provide the insurance. So there's all of these considerations which make it incredibly expensive to try and make the climate change work as a form of opportunity. So we're generally not trying to frame the warming of the Arctic as a sort of financial opportunity, but rather as how can we work with it and adapt with it, so those opportunities there are will be exhausted in a sustainable manner.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And as I mentioned in the beginning of this lightning talk, you had the opportunity to vote in a poll to see where you perceive Earth observation capabilities can bring the biggest added value to the EU Arctic policy. So we can have a look at the results. And from the results, we can see that most of you, or like the option that won the poll, is concerned with monitoring glacier and sea ice extent or dynamics. This is something that we have already mentioned, but also Earth observation can provide data on permafrost and land ecosystem. So again, something that we have tackled in our discussions, but also vessel behavior, ship traffic. So we have this maritime scope as well. So yes, of course, I mean, Earth observation can bring a lot of value to many of these sectors, and all of them can benefit from something that remote sensing can offer. Maybe with a few words, do you have anything to comment on this, Morten?
I think these are very good options, all of them, and I understand also why this would be a winner. And I also would like to highlight that, of course, permafrost is an incredibly pressing concern, not just because of the permafrost thawing, but because of the gases inside of the permafrost that's being released, which can be pathogenic for humans, but also because of disastrous effects that it has on the infrastructure that already is built on permafrost, which is cracking because of it. And if I may, I might also add that we in the EU Commission and in DG DEFIS in particular, there is already a sort of a collection of the data inputs we have from Earth observation. So it's called the Copernicus Arctic Hub. And if you're interested to look into that, you can Google it and you'll find and look how much of this data that we already have is accessible and pertaining to the Arctic. And I should also mention, of course, that the EU has an annual conference of its own on the Arctic. It's called the EU Arctic Forum and the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue and Youth Dialogue. We like long terms in the EU. It's held every other year in Brussels, every other year in an Arctic location. So previous year in Kittilä in Finland, and this year in September 1st to 3rd will be in Brussels.
Thank you very much also for this invite, and thank you very much, Morten, for joining us today. It was very insightful, and we learned a lot about how the EU Arctic policy is progressing and what role Earth observation can play in it. So I would like to ask you for a round of applause for Morten.
Thank you.